It's time to weather Wave's Maschinen Krieger Küster. Hey, I'm John from John Bius Scale Models. Thanks for joining me for this video. Now for me, the fun in any Maschinen Krieger build is the weathering. That's the part I look forward to. That's kind of like where everything is pointed. Some models, they're fun to paint. Some models, they may be fun to build, but for me, Maschinen Krieger is all about weathering. If you missed the first video in this series, you can check that out. There's supposed to be a link popping up right about now, if I remember. And you can see the construction process and getting it painted and putting on a dot filter. But this video is going to be all about the weathering. All right, the first thing I want to do is I want to apply an oil wash, and I'm going to use this Winsor & Newton raw umber. It's just a dark brown so that it can suggest dirt and rust and anything else you want. Now what I've got over here in my palette is I put a blob of the oil right up here, so I've got some to work with. Then I've got a little bit down here that's been fairly heavily thinned. You can see that it's a very runny wash. And then in this other palette well, I've got some additional odorless thinner over there. And what I do is as I'm working, if this starts getting a little thick, I'll come over here and get some of this thinner and bring it over like that, just a little bit at a time so that it doesn't change the consistency too much. If it gets a little too thin, I'll get some oils from over here, work them in there. So it's just kind of a back and forth process. Now I'm not going to be particularly neat about this because all I'm trying to do is get the color on. This thing is going to be fairly heavily weathered. So I'm just going to let this stuff flow where it's going to, let it spread like it wants to. You'll notice, because this is a fairly flat finish, you'll notice that when I apply it, let me get in here and see if I can get in close and show it, that it spreads out quite a bit. See how it's done that? That bleeding. If I were on a more satin or gloss surface, it wouldn't do that. This would be, if you're trying to get a clean look in terms of panel lines where you want to wipe off everything but what's in the panel line, you definitely want a gloss coat or at least a very good satin coat, because that'll give you good cleanup. But if you're going for a weathered model, I just recommend, if it's a flat surface, a matte surface, just go with it. That's what I'm going to do, because you'll be able to blend that in a little bit. When it dries, it won't be quite so dramatic, but it will definitely contribute to the dirty look of the model. So I'm going to continue applying this oil all around the model, on all the little greeblies and all the little recesses, and then I'll start blending it. All right, to make it a little easier to handle, I mounted it up on the waste unit so I can do this part and then I can go and do the other part. But I've got all the panel lines washed and just kind of spread it around on there. I mean, even like right here, I just kind of slopped it on there, enhanced the streaking, I guess you'd say. And all I'm going to do here, and I don't know if it's showing up on camera, but that's not even completely dry yet. Some of that thinner's still wet. And I'm just going to go in and I'm going to get some odorless thinner on my brush, and I damped off most of it. And I'm just going to start pushing the tide marks of those oils back a little bit towards the panel line here. Now, whether you decide to spread it out or blend it or streak it is completely up to whatever you think it needs to look like. Say, for instance, right here, you can see there's a little heavier streak that's developed there. I'm just going to go in and I'm going to push that stuff back towards the panel line, but I'm not going to completely blend it away because I want it to retain that dirty look. Now, once I get this process done, I'll go back and let those thinners dry off completely, and I can see, okay, where do I want to make adjustments? But the process of doing this panel line wash the way I'm doing it, where you're not trying to get a super clean look, is essentially saying, how do I want the weathering to look? How do I want the final thing to be dirty? That looks good to me. Same way with coming up here around this bolt detail. You can just come in and push it back towards the bolt detail. You can pull some of the oil that's there and start streaking it down, and that'll leave a little bit of a stain, and you can go back and develop that stain later. So there's no, I don't want to say there's no wrong way to do it, because I'm sure that some of us could come up with one. But it's really a process of just moving the oils around on the surface so that it comes up with a look that you like, that's suggesting dirt and grime and everything else. So I'm just going to continue doing this around the model, and then I'll give it a chance to dry and go back and make any adjustments. The beauty of oils is they take a long time to dry. So I've got a good day that I can work on this and make any adjustments as needed. To start the chipping, I want to do what essentially amounts to some edge dry brushing, just to start making sure that all the edges look like they have some kind of chipping to them. The first color I'm going to use is Vallejo Sky Gray, and I'm just going to hit the edges where the dark gray camo intersects with an edge or something like that. Now, it's not a perfect match by any stretch for the lighter gray color, but that's okay, because I'm going to be coming back with a darker chipping color that's going to cover up most of it, but it will, what does remain will suggest that it has been, this dark gray has been painted over the light gray and thus has been chipped back, and that's the first level of chipping. With that lighter chipping done, I'm going to use a mix of 2 parts chocolate brown, Vallejo chocolate brown, and 1 part Vallejo German gray. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to just begin the same process of dry brushing the edges, but this time along the lighter areas. And then I'll also hit some of the areas where I did the lighter dry brushing. I still want a dark edge to show, but I also want to retain just a little bit of that light colored speckling, I guess you'd say. The next thing I want to do is use the sponge method to just suggest some heavier areas of chipping. Now, because I've already done a lot of the dry brushing, I won't have to do as much with the sponge. The sponge will be more for spot application of just some really major chips like that. And I think by keeping them more restrained, they actually look better than if I were to just pounce all over every light gray edge, which I have to be careful not to do. I love this process of chipping. Need to remember to get the dark areas too. I love this process of chipping. I think it just looks so cool. But I have to remind myself continually, restraint, show restraint. But I'll just continue doing this, and there is no right or wrong. You know, you decide. If it looks good to you, then it's good. If it doesn't, keep wrenching on it. Keep working on it. All right, I got those sponge chips done, and I want a little heavier, of course, on the feet, because they're what's going to be in contact with the ground. So when you're weathering ma.k, don't be afraid to really chip up the armor and the feet and things like that. Now, another thing I want to do is chip the decals. Now, you can paint over them, but sometimes that doesn't look really realistic. So what I like to do sometimes is just come in and very carefully with my knife, just gently scrape away at the decal. And I'm not putting any pressure at all on it. I'm just letting the blade do the work for me. And I just keep going back over it until it starts lifting up some of the decal. Now, if you go too deep and you get down into the paint, then just go back and add a little bit of your chipping color paint. But actually physically chipping the decals can look really good. Now the last type of chipping that I'm going to do is brush chipping. And for this, I've thinned down my chipping color. When I did it with dry brushing and with sponging, it was unthinned. But when I do it with a brush, and I'm getting my brush ready off camera, that's why you're not seeing anything. But I just take a fine tipped brush and I just go in and add streaks and things like that to suggest scratches. Now you can do as many or as few of these as you want, but the idea is to just keep them very fine. I'm letting my brush even just kind of bounce across the surface of the model so that it's not necessarily a perfectly straight, even line, but just adding in those kind of chips. You can even come into areas that already have some chipping, like right here. I can get my eyes focused and just further develop those chips like that. Just making very fine movements, very fine, just letting the tip of the brush just barely touch. And you can develop it around like that, and then just bring it forward, and there. Now you've got a place where something happened. But I'll continue doing this chip, and you know, you certainly would want to do it with the lighter color too, and then add some darker in it. So the same theory of color still applies, but this will just add some scratches and things like that, which is especially important along the feet and the pieces of armor and things like that. So as you've noticed, I've been demonstrating on this leg. Now I got to do the other leg and the upper hull and the lower part of the, I guess you'd say, the waist. So there's quite a bit of chipping left to do, but I'll do it off camera for your sake and for mine. I don't want to make this model a rust bucket, but at the same time, I do want to add in some rust. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this AK weathering pencil. This is strong ochre. I'm just going to dot on some color like this. And then I'm going to take a brush that's just been damped in water, and then I get most of the water off. I'm just going to kind of blend it like that. Just bounce the brush along, let it move that color around some. These act a little bit like oils in that you can blend them some and you can streak them some. Not quite as flexible as oils, but you get some rust tones going there, you get a little bit of streaking, and in about 2 minutes that'll be dry. So I'll just go around and look for areas of larger rust chipping, or larger chipping rather, and put that on there to develop a little bit of rust. Now for areas where I want a little bit of a rust wash around a bolt or some detail like that, I've got some Vallejo light rust. It's Vallejo Model Air. And I've thinned it down with water and a little bit of matte medium. And I'll just go in and wash that around any bolt detail that I want to have a suggestion of rust. And I can go back in and clean that up. I can streak some down like this. It's very, very flexible in terms of application. Remember, when you're using acrylics, that's an additive process. You put a little bit at a time on and build it up. With oils and enamels, it's more of a subtractive process, where you put a bunch on and then you take it off. But using this and kind of switching back and forth between oils and acrylics allows me to get more things done. The engine parts have already been given a coat of Tamiya gunmetal and then a heavy application of Nuln oil. Now I need to do a little more just to give them a little bit of life and weather and wear. I'm going to use Citadel's Runefang steel to kind of bring out some of the highlights using dry brushing with my big fluffy brush. Now what I'm looking to do here is just bring out those edges and details so that when somebody's looking at it, it's a little more apparent. Just gives it a little more volume and depth. I'm still going to do some additional steps to make it look greasy and dirty, and we're going to add in a little bit of rust in a few places. This will just help bring out the volumes. Now, on a few areas of the engine, I want to add some rust tones just to make it seem like they're made of different metals. So I'm going to base paint this pipe, this whole piece of pipe here, and this, whatever this dealie is, I'm going to base paint them in Vallejo Sky Gray and then add some rust tones over that. Next, I'm going to add in some rust colors with these Vallejo Model Air paints. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the orangey rust color. And yes, orangey is the official name. I bet you can guess the next color. It's going to be the yellow ochre. I'm going to do the spots just a little lighter this time. I went heavier with the orange color, I think. Orange sells rust very well. You need the other colors too, but orange is what really makes the eye read rust, in my opinion. Finally, I'm going to cover the whole thing in Agrax Earthshade. Alright, the Agrax Earthshade is still drying a little bit, but I think that will sell the notion of rust on these parts, which is what I'm going for. I want to add some fluid staining effects, so I'm going to use these Vallejo products: petrol spills, oil stains, and fuel stains. Now, the basic difference between them, if you look over in the palette here, is you have a dark blue-black, you have a brown, and then you have a lighter red-brown. That's the basic colors that are going on there. But the application is, it's completely up to you, of course. I like to look at some areas and imagine, okay, would that have some kind of fluid stain? I also like to think in terms of contrast. What would work there for contrast? Like here on this rusty part, I'm going to use the darker color and just put that in there to represent fluid that has leaked out for some reason out of that part. And this stuff dries gloss, so it can represent fresh wet effects if you leave it gloss. If you don't want it gloss, once you put it on, just thin a little bit of matte medium or matte varnish with water and just touch over the top of it once this is dry, of course, and that'll work just fine. Now, if you don't have the Vallejo products, you can use, for example, I quite often for this, if I want the effects to be matte from the very beginning, then I'll often use Citadel's Known Oil and Agrax Earthshade to represent various fluid stains and things like that. So it doesn't have to be, of course, these. And you could even just thin down paint a lot and make use of paint for some of these stains. I've even, in an unfortunate, it wasn't an unfortunate schmelting accident, but in an unfortunate accident one morning here at the hobby desk, I found out that you can use coffee to stain your models. So that's also a possibility. Now, there are plenty of other places around the model to put fuel stains. For example, in this area here, I imagine there's a lot of hydraulic fluid and oil and things like that going on. So I'm just going to heavily coat that to represent quite a bit of fluid staining going on here. These fluid stains, I'm just going to put them all around the model in various places. My friend Martin Kovac from Night Shift Scale Models says that weld beads chip, but they don't rust. So I'm going to use this silver pencil to first go in and brighten up some of these weld beads a bit. I'll go back in with some Agrax Earthshade just to bring back the definition in those weld beads and also to matte down the shine just a little bit. I want to start adding some earth effects. So I'm going to use these Vallejo model washes to get started, gray and desert dust. And I mix them up in equal parts in my palette. And all I'm going to do is just get an old nylon brush. I'm just going to kind of start stippling it on. No pattern, no particular goal in mind for the flow of it. Just stippling it on, hopefully on camera and in focus. Sorry about that. Just stippling it on like this. And what I'll do is let each layer dry and then go back and add more. So you want to build that color up. Now this stuff dries much more transparent than it goes on. It goes on, you look at it and you think that's a little severe. Pardon the lack of focus. It's a little severe, but once it dries, it's much more transparent. I'm going to keep it real subtle, but you see once it dries, it just gives a lighter look to it. You could go in with more, you could go in with additional colors to really sell the notion of dirt and things like that, but I'm going to use less earth effects on this model than I do on others, just because that's the look that I'm wanting to get. But it does look a bit dusty, and that's what I was going for. All right, there are just a few things left to do on this guy. Thing I want to do now is add some, I guess you'd say, soot effects, smoke effects, that kind of thing. There's several places on the model that I'll do this. Of course, the end of the gun barrel is certainly one of them. I'll do some on the ends of these smoke dischargers here, because you'd have to imagine there's quite a bit of smoke when that gets discharged. A few places around on the engine. There's some vents. Let's see if I can get that in camera. See that little round vent right there behind the wire? I'll do some on that. Just any of the places that look like there's some kind of exhaust going on, some kind of smoke or fire or whatever going on. Now I'm using Starship Filth from About a Lung 502. And I'm just going to wipe off most of this on the brush and then dry brush that on the area that I want to appear kind of sooty. Now, I could use Tamiya weathering powders, I could use pigments, I could use lots of different things. I'm using this because I like the effect, and when it does dry, it will take it a while, but when it does dry, it's on there. It's not going to get smeared off or anything like that. So let me get these soot effects done, and I'll look at the model and see what else I think might need to be added. All right, well, I think I am ready to call this guy done. I'm pretty happy with how he turned out. He looks beat up, but not completely completely worn down and not fit for duty. I'm liking the way it's looking. Sometimes when I finish a model, at first when I finish it, I'm not really liking it, and then it'll kind of grow on me. This one I'm kind of liking it right off the bat. I like the staining that I put in to look like things dripping down from there. I was real happy with how that turned out. The chipping I'm good with. I thought that I wanted to show some restraint, and I feel like I did that. There's plenty of little stains and just little features when you get right up close to see. So yeah, this is certainly not a perfect Maschinen Krieger build. I don't think I'll ever do anything perfect, but it's one I can live with and say, yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Now, if you plan on building this kit, I would say pay particular attention during the construction phase to just test fit everything, sand everything down, work on the seams. There are a lot of seams on this model. And I don't say that to deter anyone from tackling it because, you know, I mean, obviously, if I can build it, anybody can build it. But it definitely requires a little love and attention to get everything sorted out and ready for paint. But once you get it built, once you get past that initial build, it's definitely got a lot to commend itself when it comes to painting and weathering. Well, thank you so much for watching this video, especially if you're still hanging around here at the end. I'm especially grateful for all the folks that hang around here at the end, and I appreciate it. And if you've not already done so, there's a subscribe button down somewhere over there. If you've not done so, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that and maybe the little bell icon, and just that way you'll know when I have new videos come out. And if you would, I would be most grateful if you would leave a comment below and just tell me what you thought, or if you enjoyed this, or you know, if maybe you learned something from it, or maybe it just helped you in your nap. Whatever the case may be, I'd appreciate a comment and a like for the video. It helps me grow the channel. It really does. So I would be most grateful for that. There's also links down below to the various social media platforms that I'm on. If you're on one of those, please connect with me there. I always like hearing from people and just talking about what you're doing in your modeling. It's always fascinating to me to hear what other people are doing and what projects they're working on. And there's a link to Patreon if you would like to support the work that I do here on this channel. I would be most grateful for it if you just click on that and see what I have to offer. And if you're already a Patreon supporter, thank you so much for coming alongside of me and helping make this possible. I'm just super grateful for it. It is a blessing to me. It's a blessing to my family, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to do what I do without your support. So thank you. And with all that being said, I'll do as I always like to do and leave you with one final thought. In this hobby, if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Happy day to you, friends. Bye-bye.